The 1980s were a turbulent time for anime in the West. Nearly 2 decades prior, attempts were made to bring shows like Speed Racer over to America, but not to much success. For many years, anime as a medium was written off over here, with the only people interested in it being hardcore otaku, importing fan-subbed VHS tapes directly from Japan. To American producers, anime just didn't look profitable enough. In Japan, a series by the name of Dragon Ball was becoming increasingly popular, and in the 80s there were attempts to dub the original Dragon Ball into English, namely the studio Harmony Gold, but only 5 episodes were made and movies 1 and 3 were fused into a single film. There would not be another attempt to dub Dragon Ball until 1993 when Creative Products Corporation acquired the license to distribute an English dub in the Philippines. In 1995, the newly founded Funimation Entertainment partnered with BLT Productions and Seagull Entertainment to dub the original Dragon Ball, which would go on to be called the Ocean Dub. They completed 13 episodes, but due to poor ratings, they decided Dragon Ball was not fit for US markets, and so they moved on to its sequel series, Dragon Ball Z. Saban Entertainment, the company most well known for the Power Rangers series, had previously done a lot of work dubbing and localizing Japanese animation prior to 1994, with shows like Macron 1 and The Little Bits and Honeybee Hutch. You know, just the classics. A few years prior to their acquisition of Dragon Ball Z, the company Saban had collaborated with to make Power Rangers, Renaissance Atlantic, approached Toei about creating an Americanized version of Sailor Moon in the same vein as Power Rangers, having animated and live-action scenes. This was turned down in favor of having DiC Entertainment dub the original anime into English instead. This test pilot of Sailor Moon would be erroneously referred to as Saban Moon, even though Saban Entertainment had really nothing to do with the test pilot at all. Still, it went to show that adapting Japanese shows for American audiences would be a tricky endeavor. Later on in 1996, Saban partnered with Funimation and Ocean Productions to dub the first 67 episodes of Dragon Ball Z, though they were edited down to 53 episodes, with the Tree of Might movie being split up into 3 parts and aired as just part of the show, bringing it up to 56. Saban Entertainment was largely responsible for the extensive censoring done to the show, as they wanted to make it more family-friendly. This resulted in things like Master Roshi's beer being turned into a frothy mug of water. This is also where the infamous Hiffle comes from, as opposed to just being hell. They weren't allowed to show any death, alcohol, cigarettes, and they weren't even allowed to show children in distress, so scenes of Gohan crying were edited to remove the tears. Eventually, the dub was cancelled due to poor ratings, and the future of Dragon Ball Z in America was unclear. Fortunately, reruns of the dub were picked up by Toonami, Adult Swim / Cartoon Network's anime block, and with that, they found the audience they needed. Dragon Ball Z was suddenly successful here in America, so much so that they needed more episodes to air. With new funding, Funimation began dubbing the series once again. However, this time, Saban Entertainment would not be involved, so Funimation didn't have to worry about the strict censorship guidelines. A major problem, though, was that Funimation couldn't afford to hire Ocean's voice actors on the continuation, so they created their own in-house voice acting studio. To account for continuity between episodes, the Funimation voice actors did their best to imitate the Ocean dub's voices, though as the show went on, they gained their own personalities. Ocean would continue to dub the series in Canada, however, but instead of continuing where they left off, they started where Funimation's dub was currently at, leaving episodes 57 to 107 undubbed. They opted to just air the Funimation dub episodes up until that point, so if you lived in Canada, you could have started the show with the Ocean dub voice actors, suddenly moved to the Funimation actors, and then back to the Ocean dub. With Funimation in pretty much full control over the dub, it would continue on until 2003 at 276 episodes. I'm gonna be real with you. I did not watch Dragon Ball Z as a kid. By the time I got around to actually watching it, they were still in the middle of making Dragon Ball Z Kai, a series that cuts out the filler with the quality of the show being improved in general. And honestly, I never finished the original dub. The filler was just too much for me in the end. In America, Dragon Ball Z ended in 2003, but in Japan, it ended in 1996, with Dragon Ball GT premiering a month later. GT wouldn't make its way to the US until Z had finished its run, though. Dragon Ball GT is sort of a weird beast on its own. It was made largely without the direction of Akira Toriyama, but it had almost the exact same team as Z. It's not canon, but I think it's a fun watch if you can get past all the jank. I find it kind of interesting how delayed Dragon Ball Z had become in the US, since by the time Funimation was able to start working on the series again, it had pretty much ended in Japan. Starting in 1996, Dragon Ball Z began releasing episodes on VHS and DVD concurrently. They ran all the way to 2006, which was very late into the life of the VHS format. They also released some of the movies on VHS as well, and honestly, there's just something about popping on an episode or one of the films into a player and just watching it. Nowadays, VHS tapes are inconvenient to say the least, but it gives off a strange sort of nostalgic feeling, being able to watch it as the people who actually experienced it firsthand did. And even if you don't watch them, it's still fun to collect them. They even have cool art that lines up if you have them all. 20 years later, it's easy to look back on Dragon Ball Z with a sense of nostalgia, but also the feeling that we've seen a lot of the same kind of thing since then. But at the time, it was like nothing that had been shown on American TV before. If it weren't for the mid to late 90s anime we got like Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and Pokemon, then anime as we know it in America just wouldn't exist, or at least it would be very, very different. I think the show impacted us in a positive way, and for that, I'm grateful. That doesn't mean we're done looking at the series, though. No, we've got a long way to go. Let's think for a moment. If you were into Dragon Ball Z at the time, what else could you do to immerse yourself in its world? The license of Dragon Ball Z toys in the 90s would fall mostly to Irwin, a Canadian company, but Bandai would produce some of their own as well. The commercial for these toys just cracked me up.
Dragon Ball Z! Now there are over 100 of your favorite Dragon Ball Z minifigures for you to collect. And look! There are even supersized Dragon Ball Z action figures with movable arms and legs for realistic battle action. It's a fight to the finish. But who will win? Never has there been a dark force so strong and so powerful to threaten Earth. Can Dragon Ball Z save the day? Dragon Ball Z action figures, each sold separately from Irwin.
I mean, it's accurate, but who would ever advertise their toys like this? Alright kids, who needs imagination? Just smash your figures together, it's just like the show. Some of the Irwin toys are cool looking, but a lot of them have this certain jank factor. Only 5 points of articulation, no articulation at all, or they're huge, and good luck getting another giant ass figure to match the one you got already. Honestly, it feels like a majority of the Irwin figures had to have some sort of gimmick to them. These ones power up, but it's really just an LED light below them. Here we have blasting energy action figures. They're static with no articulation and they shoot plastic balls. The Frieza version is a particular favorite of mine. It's something alright. Honestly, it kind of feels like you're shooting yourself in the foot by taking away almost all play value with a figure like this. I mean, Goku is just squatting, and it's not like he's in the iconic Kamehameha pose or anything, so it just comes off as a bit lame. The transformation figures are the freakiest I've seen so far. You start with a pretty normal base figure, but then you have these giant, disgusting shells you're supposed to stuff the figure into Tauntaun style. And yeah, I know they got bulkier when they powered up in the show, but these guys look fucking roided out, and they lose their necks too. I kinda went overboard and bought as many of these as I could find. Just having these thick Goku and Vegeta husks sounded like fun. In practice, wow, these feel like they're gonna disintegrate at any time. I mean, that's to be expected of 20-year-old rubber. Go get an old portable DVD player or some other rubbery electronics and you'll find it's got a very sticky, unpleasant feel to it. That's the rubber turning back into petroleum. To think that one day, a million years from now, people will be fueling their time machines with my melted cell. They also made 12-inch dolls featuring Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, and others. Well, here's Super Saiyan Goku, and it's just a G.I. Joe with a new head. The head sculpt itself is pretty nice. Honestly, a lot of toys didn't exactly get the Super Saiyan hair right, but they've done a good job here. Here's what I can only describe as Gohan if he were an elf on a shelf. He's a creepy little bastard. I'm not sure why this exists. Yep, that's it. Similarly to Pokemon at the time, there was also a line of Burger King toys. However, I refused to spend $20 on literal waste, but I would, however, spend money on a Hardee's, or Carl's Jr. for you West Coast people, Dragon Ball that's also a Magic 8-Ball. No matter how much you ask, it can't help with your crippling loneliness though. Obviously, there were like normal figures as well, but that's not very interesting now, is it? Like any toy line, they also attempted to make play sets and vehicles to varying degrees of success. Like, yeah, I can get behind Trunks' time machine or the healing pod from Planet Namek, though honestly that's kind of a weird playset in and of itself, but there's something I've come across that has no explanation. It makes absolutely zero sense to me. Alright, here it is. Gohan, a character who has the ability to fly, on a Capsule Corp hover bike. Why? Is this like when Babbidy's minions stole his energy so he's too weak to fly or some shit? Why does he need an air Vespa? And yeah, maybe you could pretend that's the reason he needs it if it weren't for the fact that they made one for Goku too. It baffles me, honestly, and while I couldn't find any for sale, there's other ones out there. Kid Gohan on a sky bike, Gohan on a one wheel. I wish I could explain why it's these characters that have vehicles when there are tons of figures they put out of characters that can't fly and could have given the bikes. Like seriously, you don't want to give Roshi or Bulma the Capsule Corp tech? It's gotta be given to the most overpowered characters in the show? Like, even Android 17 and 18 who really liked cars weren't given their own vehicle. Well, in the end, giving Gohan and Goku motorcycles is about as weird as forcing them to live in nightmare versions of their bodies. But I haven't told you about the weirdest vehicles yet. Future Trunks with a Jetsons hover car, which yeah, I guess he's from the future, but hover cars already exist during the Android saga. But this one takes the cake. Roadster Vegeta. It's Vegeta with a race car. That's number 69. You can't make this stuff up. He doesn't even fit in the car too, so my theory is all these vehicles are molds that were meant for other toy lines but were never produced. And they thought to themselves, hey, we need a way to upcharge these Dragon Ball figures, but we've got no playsets ready. Oh, how about those rejected Jetsons toys? That's the only way I think we end up with a 69 race car Vegeta. And I wish I had 69 Vegeta, I really do. But surprise, surprise, 69 race car Vegeta and hover car Trunks didn't exactly sell too well. All I can find online are pictures, but one day though. One day. The Irwin toys and all the other Dragon Ball Z toys are certainly a product of their era. Let's not forget that for North Americans, by the time these Buu Saga figures were releasing, we were still on the Cell Saga. You could go to the store and get spoiled on future characters, like who the f*** is Gotenks? You haven't even been introduced to Goten and Kid Trunks, much less the concept of fusion. Most of these figures are fine for what they are, and if you're a kid, you don't care that your Frieza figure has DSLs, much less that your Gohan was crippled in the fight against Cell and now needs a mobility scooter to get around. I absolutely would have been fine having these toys as a kid, and hell, I'll enjoy having them all on my shelf now, but yeah, some of these are dog shit. Well then, what else is there for a kid besides toys? If you were an American Dragon Ball fan that also wanted to play some games based on the show, well, then you were shit out of luck. They didn't exist. Of course they did in Japan, but they didn't bother localizing them here. The first Dragon Ball game we'd get in America would be a port of Shenlong no Nazo, an OG Dragon Ball game, except all Dragon Ball iconography would be removed and it would be titled Dragon Power and was released for the NES. Goku has been turned into a monkey boy, Bulma's hair is hot pink, Master Roshi is a sick-ass wizard, and Yamcha, well, he's Yamcha, nothing much can change that. It's fine. I mean, pretty much the only thing that's different from Shenlong no Nazo is sprites and story. It's still an interesting footnote as America's very first taste of anything Dragon Ball at all, predating Harmony Gold's failed dub of Dragon Ball. However, this video is about Dragon Ball Z. In Japan, there were tons and tons of DBZ games, mostly for the Famicom and Super Famicom, and until the 16-bit era, they'd mostly be RPG and strategy games. Eventually, they realized that it's kind of dumb to not be making fighting games, so they made the Butoden trilogy, with each game focusing on a different saga of the anime. They're serviceable enough. My biggest gripe is they all feel too similar to one another. And like, I get they were essentially just meant to be yearly updates akin to, I don't know, the COD series, but I prefer this to COD. The controls are a bit clunky, but what it lacks in gameplay, it makes up for it with looks. I enjoy the aesthetic of 16-bit games, and adding Dragon Ball Z on top of that is a recipe for success. It just falls apart when you realize you have to play them eventually. If you really want to see the roots of Dragon Ball Z fighting games, give them a look. Honestly, they're really cheap online if you want to avoid the moral quandary of emulation, but you know, I don't really care when it's a 30-year-old game they don't plan on ever re-releasing. The same year as Butoden 3's release, they came out with Buyu Retsuden on the Sega Mega Drive, Genesis for all you Americans, which is pretty much just a Butoden game on Mega Drive. In the year 2000, the Dragon Ball Z collectible card game would be released, and I've got some here. They're not anything to write home about, and I don't have a single clue how to play the game itself, but there seems to still be a dedicated player base to this day. If anything, I think they're cool enough to have just based on the art alone. By 2006, they had done 18 expansions, and yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it. The very first Dragon Ball game licensed to release in America would be Dragon Ball GT Final Bout in 1997, a show which wouldn't air in the States until 2003. It's not DBZ, so we're gonna ignore it. Also, it sucks ass. In 2002, a bunch more games would release. The Dragon Ball Z collectible card game for GBA, Dragon Ball Z Budokai, the Legacy of Goku. We're just gonna forget those all exist for a bit and talk about Dragon Ball Z Legendary Super Warriors, which was released for the Game Boy Color, in an era which GBA reigned supreme. So think about this game like a hybrid between Pokemon, the Pokemon trading card game, and Dragon Quest. The difference is that while this game inherits their gameplay loops, it's not nearly as, well, Good. Very quickly, it starts to become a never-ending back and forth, and you realize pretty fast that the game lacks any kind of depth that even other turn-based card games have. There are 2 basic turns, attack and defense, and you get specific cards for each turn. Your basic attacks do pretty much nothing, so you're just sitting there for 2 or 3 turns charging your ki so you can let out the occasional Masenko or Kamehameha, all while the AI does its best to do damage to you, which it really can't unless it does a ki blast of its own. So you guard, charge, ki blast, guard, charge, and it's just that over and over for 10 minutes. Yeah, that's about the length of an average fight here. Honestly, this game isn't worth playing based on gameplay alone, it's pretty subpar. What's decent is the music, though through a 10-minute fight it starts to get a bit grating, and the story. Did you think DBZ Abridged was a quick way to experience Dragon Ball's story? Well, in this game we exposition our way to the Saiyan fight in just about a minute. You don't get to fight Raditz, he's killed with a wall of text. Text that is, let's just say, a teensy bit grammatically incorrect. It honestly feels like they didn't get someone to proofread this shit. I think it's worth playing just to see the ridiculous liberties they take story-wise and how incoherent most sentences are. Other than that, I don't think it's particularly worth playing. Now, aside from the plethora of Game Boy Advanced and PS2 games, right after Final Bout we got Ultimate Battle 22, and while I hate myself, I don't hate myself enough to be put through that. Let's just say until Legacy of Goku 2 and Budokai 3, we weren't exactly dealt a great hand in terms of Dragon Ball Z games. I've already done a video on Taiketsu, so go watch that if you want to know my opinions on that dumpster fire. But yeah, all in all, I'd say we got a pretty raw deal, which really is a shame. You'd think that with a gold mine on your hands like Dragon Ball Z, you'd want to be putting only the best stuff out there. But hey, the first Legacy of Goku sold over 600,000 copies, so why not just be lazy and put out shit over and over again? I think besides the Budokai series, kids who grew up on Dragon Ball in the 90s didn't really have a great game they could put a lot of hours into. Unlike the juggernaut Pokemon, it just seems like the idea of DBZ didn't translate as well in game form. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate Dragon Ball Z games, it's just become so tired for me. It seems nowadays they don't want to try anything new or inventive with the series, instead opting for traditional or 3D fighters. I'm honestly just sick of DBZ fighting games. I understand that's the best genre for the series, but come on, we've had how many of these in the past decade? Say what you want about Dragon Ball The Breakers, but it's something new. Alright, got a bit off topic there. Overall, I'd say that Dragon Ball Z kicks ass. I mean, how could the series not have a reputation like that after all those movie releases had metal soundtracks? You could go to the movie theater and see Dragon Ball Z and Korn would be playing. You just don't get that with other anime. And all the games having a kick-ass soundtrack too. Oh, never mind. Dragon Ball Z helped shape a generation of anime fans, all while still staying relevant to this day. Sure, Dragon Ball Super has its problems, but would you rather have the Dragon Ball Legacy end with GT? I don't think so. I was never really into the series until about 7 years ago, but just through cultural osmosis, I was very aware of the series until then. I'm not sure the impact of the series was quite as big as Pokemon, or hell, even something like Power Rangers for that matter, but without it, we just wouldn't be where we are today in America in regards to anime. Sure, it'd be around, but I don't think it would have been as culturally accepted as it is today, and for that, I'm glad Dragon Ball Z was there to break the fall. Hey, thanks for watching if you made it this far. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the support over the last few months, and for those of you who aren't subscribed, I'd like you to consider it. We're really close to 1,000 subs, and if we reach that, I'd be closer to improving the quality of these videos, so if you liked this and want to see more like it in the future, Sailor Moon, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Thanks.